So here we go this week. Let's see if this works right. All right, so what we're going to be doing this week is we're talking about sanctification. We're going into this thing called the Proverbs ladder, what it means to have godly character. And we're going to be talking about character in terms of how God defines it. And then we're going to get into my second favorite argument for the existence of God, the moral argument. It's my favorite. I mean, it's outside of the fine-tuning argument. This argument is so, to me, locked tight, so easy to apply and talk to people about, that if you can get a grasp on it and understand it, it points directly to the God of the Bible. And it's easy to use. And it's intuitive and it makes sense. So we're going to be talking about that today and going through that, okay? So you remember this. If you've been in class, you remember this. We're into book 4. What we're looking at now is how does a Christian grow to actually have Christ radiate from their life, okay? It starts out when you get saved. Where the person is justified, God does everything. He's literally the one who puts wisdom in my heart. Nobody has wisdom unless Christ gives it to you. It's not possible, okay? People think they're smart. They think they're wise. They're not. Wisdom only comes from God. So that's the first thing. Now, after that, what happens is there's only one reason he opens your eyes, because he wants to know you. The whole point is he wants to grow his relationship with you. Now, how does he do that? By driving you nuts. He molds your character. That's what he does. The perfect example is marriage. In marriage, it drives you nuts in marriage, right? Because there's two sinners living together. So what's happening is you are being molded in a marriage if you truly meant the vows you gave when you stood in the altar before the pastor and before the congregation, you were willing to. This is what God's doing. He's molding you. And the reason he does it is because he wants to show himself through you. It's all about glory for him. And it's the same thing with a father who has a small child, a mother with a child. They want the glory that comes from their child living a life that matches their values. When your child, I remember the days when our kids would come home from school and they get those little star diplomas, most dignified or most truthful, and they come home all excited. Look at the award I got, right? And as a parent, I'd sit there and go, I'm getting the glory because I've been raising my children to hopefully live that way and show those values. So I feel I feel fantastic. I don't ever look at it and go, most truthful. You're a liar. You've always lied. What are you doing with that award? No, I don't do that to my children, right? Because hopefully it's a radiance coming from them of the value system that I've taught them. This is exactly what God does. It's the same thing. And this is what we're doing in book 4. So what we're doing today is this one. What on earth does this mean? What does it mean to have character in terms of what God says? How does culture define character? What would you say? How does culture talk about a person's character?
They set the standard.
What's that?
They set the standard.
They set a standard.
How you're viewed by society.
So if, who knows who Al Sharpton is? High character? Interesting. Anybody in here raise their hand, high character? Is he portrayed as having high character? Well, then there's no standard. There can't be, because you just shook your head, he's got no character, and yet there are people in society who says he's high character. What's the problem? Why isn't there a... What? Huh? He's a reverend, yeah. You tack that on a name, you must have it. So here's how culture defines character. It's a moving target. It's a moving target. They're going to define it any way they want. This is important to know when you're watching TV, and you know this, you get frustrated, you're going, really? That's high character? That's what I should be showing my child? hey, I got a series of videos on Al Sharpton, I want to raise you up. Let's watch him because it's a good model, right? It's not, there's no standard there. Everybody defines it according to what they think is right. Matter of fact, one of my favorite books in Judges, do you remember what the last verse is in Judges?
Amen.
No. Listen to you, you just throw it out there, you know?
Everybody did what was right in their own eyes.
Everybody does what's right in their own eyes. That's the last verse. In those days, there's no king in Israel. Everybody did what was right in his own eyes. Interesting, isn't it? Okay, so how does God define character? It's based on him. Don't, you guys got to remember this. This is so hard because we never remember it. God doesn't sit there and determine what's right and wrong. Because that's the trap you'll get caught in a debate that says, oh, if God has to determine right and wrong, then that must mean right and wrong are outside of him. That what happens is there is a right and wrong, and he goes ahead and decides which one is right and which one is wrong. Right? That's the Euthyphro dilemma, which we'll get into in another lesson. Right and wrong is his nature. It's his essence. That's who he is as a person. Right? So literally, right and wrong is based on his nature and not ours. It's not based on our behavior. And yet, because we're post-Christian in America, that's exactly how right and wrong is being determined today, based on the behavior of people and what people think, without any recourse to what God says. If you don't get this, this is why people hide in church and they don't get engaged in the culture, because they don't want to have to deal with what they're going to face from the culture, and the culture knows it. I say culture. Culture is people. You know, when people say things like they're doing it in New York City right now, they're doing it in Chicago, you know, people aren't evil, society is. That's literally Adams in New York City talking about evil and wrongdoing. I'm like, well, wait a minute, isn't society made of people? Right? So that's an issue we got to deal with to understand, and if you really want to know what good character looks like, it's pretty simple. It's based on a standard. It's objective, right? And this idea of objectivity we're going to get into today, because I use that word and I think a lot of people don't know what I mean. And I think if you don't know what I mean, you'll have a hard time. People will tangle you up in this culture. Objective truth means it's true regardless of my opinion. My opinion doesn't matter. Subjective truth means it's true because that's what I think. My opinion matters, right? So whenever we use the term objective, we're talking about some standard of truth where, sorry, your opinion doesn't matter. It doesn't count. It's true just because it is, right? If I were to say something like, it's true that I have a friend who's a married bachelor, right away, you know that's not objectively true. You know, because it contradicts itself, right? So we've got to be able to understand this, because you're going to hear this used by non-believers and skeptics. Well, everybody knows that's objectively true. Policemen are racist, right? Right now there's a case going on. I'm not sure where. It might be in Missouri. The 84-year-old man shot the black youth at the door. And his grandson, did you hear when they interviewed him? And he said, well, he's a white conservative male, so by definition he's racist. Added the word Christian. So white conservative Christian, by definition, makes you racist. That's the truth being told in our culture right now. And we sit here in our class and we go, well, that's not right. It's like, no, excuse me, you know, We know that's wrong. That's a lie. Right? So, but that's what's happening. That's the mantra that's being pushed. Just another example. Okay. So trying to figure out good versus bad, we sit there and we go, oh, I wonder what good looks like, bad looks like. From a Christian standpoint, it's simple. If God is the essence of good, because that's who he is, and if his death on the cross and resurrection gave people an opportunity then that by giving their life to him, he'd live in you, then the logical conclusion is this good person, in essence, who now lives in you, is where your goodness comes from. That's where it comes from. So good character is merely him radiating through you. Oh, go ahead.
So, but non-believers can still display good character.
We're gonna get to that in a minute, right? But that's not the definition of good. That's what we talk about good as, I'm willing to concede there are some good things. If I hold the door for a woman, that's good. Here we're talking about moral perfection, what that even looks like. And so morally good, because that's what character is. Character is not about performance. I'm not a person of high character because I average 32 points a game in basketball, right? So we've got to understand what we mean. We're talking about character. So for a Christian standpoint, it's about the God who's alive today, who's invisible, but yet visible, who lives in us and reveals himself when we allow him to, his character into the culture. What prohibits him from radiating his goodness in our life? It's us. We suck, right? We limit the Holy One of Israel. That's the way he puts it in the New Testament. We limit him because of who we are. And the only way to overcome that is to allow him to have control, and then he will. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, so when we talk about character, ingredient number one, people have to acknowledge there is such a standard for right and wrong. They don't. We have to. We have to decide, do we believe it? And if you don't, it's okay. We need to work through it and talk about it. Do we actually think there's an objective standard of right versus wrong? In other words, my opinion doesn't matter. I know the difference. There is a standard. All right? Now, once you do, that means you have to now commit to it. Now it sucks. Now it's like, okay, if I'm agreeing such a standard exists, now what has to happen, in spite of what it costs me, I have to be willing to embrace that or commit to it. In leftism or Marxism, they would do the same thing here. They would do the same thing here. They would say we all need to acknowledge for us, according to our value system, there's an objective standard of right versus wrong. They would put it as proletariat versus bourgeoisie, and they would literally say it's wrong for a limited class of people to control all the wealth and subjugate all the peasants to poverty. That's their objective standard. They all have to agree that's true. Then they have to step to the next one that says, are you willing to commit to this, to change it, to overthrow it? And hence you get the education system in our universities, Antifa, Black Lives Matter. You get all these Marxist organizations, not because they're sitting there going, I wonder how evil and sinful I can be. I really want to be the worst person I can, so I'm going to work at it. Nobody does that. They think they're right. You got to understand this. This is an ideology. They believe they're right. You know why they have power over the church most of the time? We say it, we don't believe we're right. We don't believe it to the point of what it costs us. We just won't go there.
They go, well, at least they hear me.
So here's
They
the
might not
problem.
be helping me, but
Here's the problem. Here's the problem. Here's the problem. We sit there and say amen. Here's the problem. God, in chapter 6 of Isaiah, comes to Isaiah, and he says this, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" And Isaiah says, well, there's a lot of division in Israel, God, and we don't get along that well. And some of us, we're having a lot of problems. So you're out of luck. I mean, until we get our act together and we're able to work together and stop being divisive, there's nobody to send. And God goes, yeah, that's a good point. Maybe I'll work on the church and see if I can get everybody to agree. No, she uses the word we. God uses the word you. That's the difference. Who cares about division in the church? We have a whole pastoral staff. We got like 40 people on staff. Their whole job is to try to bring unity, right? If we sit here and think, I wonder how I can get people to organize and to get along better, you're going to just be frustrated. You have to focus on Jesus Christ for you personally as your Lord and Savior and what he wants in your life. And then when you're at work at the water cooler, when you're out playing baseball, when you're in the community, it's like standing up for truth. Don't worry about all this. Does this make sense? We won't do it. We will not do it. It's going to get to the point in our culture, like it's in Canada right now. They're throwing pastors in prison for preaching a sermon the government doesn't like. You have to decide, are you willing to look at Jesus Christ as the love of your life and speak for him, or let him speak through you? It's called courage. It's tough.
And you'll have a captive audience once you're in jail.
So, what does his process of character development look like? Right? I mean, I love the way he makes it really simple. He said, here's the deal. To do what's right and to do what's just means more to me than work. That's the Old Testament verse. The translation for us is, I'm not so interested in you following the sacrifice system and the ritualistic things that you do because you think somehow you're pleasing me. I want you to live in righteousness and justice. That's how I want you to be as a person. It's way more important than, I hate to say it, serving. I know serving is critical for our church, but who wants somebody of low character who's a coward to serve in church all the time and never be developed to understand Jesus Christ and God's call for their life? Does this make sense? This is tough stuff, guys.